Hello, my friends. This is me, frantically working on sowing seeds in the midst of freezing rain. Believe it or not, this isn't the product of extreme procrastination. Doing this right before a winter storm was all a part of my plan. I'm not saying it's a good plan, but there's a method to my madness. And this week, I want to talk to you about some of my native gardening efforts, stratifying seeds, and why it takes a bit more planning to get my native plant aspirations going. And also, why I am sowing seeds in a winter storm. I was sowing a little miniature prairie. This part of Michigan isn't naturally prairie. Normally, it would be woodland, but before colonization, people managed these little pockets of prairie in the region, and they used fire then. Today, we tend to use tractors and power tools, but we also tend to introduce European grasses when we do that. And that's what I'm dealing with here. I don't know the entire history of this land, but I do know that the last owner wanted this part of the farm to function as a food plot for deer. He was a hunter, and he liked having the deer around. So he planted much of the farm with a mixture of European pasture grasses, clovers, and brassicas, and other things deer like. That's not the grassland we want. Our hippie green dream is a small patch of prairie that still functions as a pasture. It needs to function as a pasture for our geese, but we also want it to provide a lot of biodiversity. We want native habitat, and we generally want to beautify the place. So towards that end, we intentionally overgrazed this part of the farm with our honky-tonk last fall. Now, I'm sowing a pasture blend of both cool and warm season grasses native to this region to build back up the pasture here. If you're used to the greatest hits of the tall grass, you'll likely be disappointed though. Instead of big blue stem and the switchgrass and Indian grass that you would see in most prairie restorations, this blend is a bit different. It's much lower growing and hopefully a bit more practical for what we want. First off, several of these grasses are nativars. Nativars are semi-domesticated varieties of native species. They've been bred to improve certain characteristics, and many people argue that came at the cost of making them less useful for native animal species. That data is still somewhat controversial and not fully resolved, although it's definitely true that some ornamental flowers in particular have been bred into forms that are much less useful for pollinators. They don't have nectar, or they're not as easy for a pollinator to get into, or they're not the color the pollinator expects. I'm actually a bit more concerned in our case that I will likely have much less genetic diversity in these nativar grasses than I would have if this was from a natural habitat. A lot of times they'll just take a combine out to a prairie and harvest a seed mix that way. That's not what these are. Again, though, I don't know that that's even true. And for a really small application like this, I really don't think it's going to have any noticeable impact, even if it does matter. So, this mix has nativars. It has nativars for little blue stem, for buffalo grass, for blue grama grass, and side oats grama. There's also a tiny amount of sand drop seed in here. Little blue is one of the most common prairie grasses in actually all of the United States. It's definitely one of the prettiest and most widespread native grasses. It's a warm season bunch grass, and it's very famous for its beautiful copper color in fall. It's often grown ornamentally, and it's going to be a significant component of any prairie mix you would ever find. But the other three grasses, they're a bit more turf forming. These grasses are highly nutritious, and they're incredibly important fodder grasses in the United States. They have massive native ranges. Most of them are literally southern Canada all the way south to northern Mexico. Although, given the normal woodland habitat over here, a lot of them, except for the buffalo grass, although native to the state, are pretty rare here in Michigan. But that's the first pass with seed, and I found it way more annoying than I'd expected. I'm using, it's not a particularly fancy tool here. I discovered early on my farming journey that I can't count on any of the various grass seed spreaders that they sell at hardware stores. I've killed several of them. Different models of hand and push spreaders, usually trying to spread the green manure I've been using the past few years. They would jam, they would break on the seeds, or they would just fail to spread the mix, evenly. It's not uncommon for me to try and spread a mix and discover one large variety in it simply was still in the hopper. That is really common with cowpeas. So thinking I was being smart, I went with the simplest possible manual seed spreader I could find. It's basically a glorified spice shaker. And it didn't work. I think seed quality might have been part of why. I was really not expecting the native grass seed to be this fluffy. Somehow a lot of chaff was in the mix, so even on the whitest setting, the seeds just didn't shake out of the shaker or even spread. Well, they couldn't spread, they wouldn't come out. I tried, but I pretty quickly resorted to the rather clumsy mixture of spreading it by hand, the way they do in 18th century paintings, or just using the bottom of the shaker without the lid and, doing that. It wasn't exactly an even distribution, but it was better than nothing. I did my best. I also used about 200% of the seed I needed anyway. I had more than enough because I bought the quantity that they would sell me at a reasonable price, and it was about twice what I needed. And I didn't want it to go to waste. I also am currently quite paranoid about storing large quantities of seed anywhere, given the recent experiences with rats around here. So, since I'm planting them now to let them stratify, I really wanted this weather. I'm trying to build up a bit of a seed bank in the soil, and I expect to see most varieties germinate sometime come summer, probably around June. But these are all warm season grasses. And I happen to already have them in stock from another project, so that's why they're going in now. The more important seeds are the next batch, and then I'll have another pass after that. So immediately after I spread the grasses, I spread a mix of native wildflowers. These were much more common in Michigan, and they were the seeds I most needed to get in the ground. This mix included coneflowers, blanket flowers, coreopsis, milkweeds, some native mints, and some partridge pea. They're all prairie flowers that also will be happy in a savanna habitat. And I'm sowing them now because most of these seeds benefit from stratification, which means exposure to wet winter conditions will encourage the germination come spring. Or they may even require it in some cases. These are also the most important element of adding biodiversity to the farm. Grasses don't give off nectar or a lot of other things that we want. There's not much there for pollinators either. So hopefully, we'll see a bunch of pink, yellow, and purple flowers floating over the grasses over the next few years. We need to be patient though. These wildflowers take much more time and frankly work to get established, but they should be worth the wait. On the plus side, these seeds actually worked with the seed shaker, which made this bit of the process way easier and more consistent. I didn't waste money on yet another useful tool, which is a bit of validation. So yeah, once I got the wildflower seed spread, I had to rake it in, and I tried to work as fast as possible because by this time the rain had already turned into sleet, soon to become snow. But the funny thing is, all the work to get these seeds in the ground, it's not the most important pass of seeding this area that I'll be doing this year. That one comes in the next 6 weeks or so. You see, these were all warm season grasses, and the wildflowers, they're our long-term biodiversity project. Warm season grasses don't even wake up and start doing their thing until nighttime temps approach 60 degrees in like June. They're spectacular. They grow fast in the heat of summer. They're amazing at getting carbon out of the atmosphere and into the soil. But our geese most need food in spring when they're laying, and the goslings are growing like weeds. Then they get hungry again in the fall when they're fattening up for winter. That's not the best season for the warm season grasses to be growing. To address this issue, I'll be back at this in 6 weeks with what is hopefully my final pass. First, I'm going to be sowing Canadian wild rye. This is the most important seed in the entire project. The other grasses will grow most actively from about June to September, but cool season grasses take off in early spring, spend most of the summer kind of asleep, and they wake up again in the fall to sow seeds. That's critical for our farm. Come October in particular, the geese relentlessly hunt out any seed heads on any grass they can find. So I need these cool season grasses to provide food for those seasons. But I still need one other set of seeds that I'll be sowing with the grasses. These are the nitrogen fixers. So with the ryegrass, I'll be throwing down a mix of clovers and alfalfa. Unlike all the other seeds, though, these will be old world domesticated varieties. Unfortunately, that's kind of necessary. This farm sits on glacial till. Till is a great soil for blueberries and some other crops, but it's very poor in nitrogen. And due to this, some quirks of geology, evolution, and deep time, we just don't have great nitrogen fixers here in the northern US. Even our best native legumes absolutely pale in comparison to their old world rivals. Just the amount of nitrogen they can pull into the soil is a fraction of what an old world clover or alfalfa can do. That's partly why autumn olive is so successful as an invasive species. And I also have to consider the fact that I've had terrible luck getting any of the native prairie clovers to survive in any of my gardens to date. But don't worry, I'll keep trying at that one though. So instead, I'm going to compromise my ideals just a little bit and sow these other species. They're proven to work and they're already in the environment since, well, they've been part of pasture and feed plot and lawn seed blends for most of the last century. Hopefully, sometime later this year, I'll show you geese grazing on native grasses. Maybe I'll even have a wildflower or two already. I know it's a tiny area of the farm, but if this works, we intend to repeat the process in a different section next year and the year after that and on, and hopefully spread the native species restoration to like an ever-increasing percentage of the farm. We love our geese, and hopefully they can be good partners in making this farm a beautiful, sustainable place. If you enjoyed this video, I'd love it if you would take a moment to give it a like. That helps encourage the algorithm to show the video to lots more people. And if you aren't subscribed, I'm producing a new letter from the farm every Friday, and I'd love for you to watch the next one. You can even hit the bell icon to make sure you'll be notified. Next week, we'll talk a bit about our native plant efforts. I have a lot more going on there, Some of it is a bit more landscaping friendly. And I'll show you how I'm going to try and germinate a bunch of our native wildflowers using a couple of systems. Until then, keep growing, my friends.